Welcome back to Dragon Dreams. I'm Ivan. Today I'm going to talk about why I prefer Rules Lite games. So, looking things up slows things down. Number one, it kills the momentum. And that's something that I think, we all don't want for immersion purposes. We want to be immersed in the story and have things really be flowing and be action-packed. Secondly, the games today are shorter and less frequent than they used to be. Now, there's good reasons for some of these that are very understandable, but I just want to go through that because a couple of reports from old school. Number one, there's a player I have right now in my Beckme game that I'm running who said that back in the old days, they would play AD&D First Edition for an entire weekend. I remember playing games that would be like a Saturday, 11 a.m. till 1 a.m. the following Sunday morning. GM Bloodworth over at Unscripted and Unchained RPG Reviews has said that he also would play every day after high school back when he was a teenager. And so if you look at the old adventure modules, it was normal for adventure modules to have 50 to 75 rooms. Those were not mega dungeons. Taking those two things into consideration, the needs for immersion and the needs to get things done in the game, I think that Rules Lite really helps because when we slow things down, we get into this rut where from session to session it can sometimes be hard to follow what the overarching plot is. Okay, let's say you're going to the Caves of Chaos, you meet goblins in one cave, you meet orcs in another cave, and then way back up at the top somewhere you meet like a cleric who's in charge of this evil cult of chaos. If that takes you, say half a dozen sessions or even a dozen sessions to get through all of that, and you're not playing very frequently, you're just playing once a week or every other week, the players may not link up the fact that the orcs and the goblins are both working for the cult of chaos that the evil cleric is running. Okay, and so there's good reasons to want things to flow. I suggest that Rules Lite is a very good way to do that, and that's my preference for how to speed things up. So I'm going to propose two rules that are guidelines for what I would consider to be the right amount of rules. Number one, the GM should be able to memorize most of the rules most of the time. And number two, the players should have most of their character sheet memorized most of the time. So consider these two scenarios. You're going through and somebody wants to cast a spell and they kind of forget how it all works, and the GM has to stop and look up the spell in the player's handbook or whatever, the rule book, and figure out what the duration is and how many of what type of characters are affected and so forth, whether people get a saving throw or they don't get a saving throw, or it's save for half damage, all those kind of little fiddly details of the spell description, that really slows things down. Consider another scenario. You're walking along a rope bridge, going carefully hand over hand, when a griffin slams into the bridge. Everybody to make a dex roll to see if you fall off. Let's see. My dex says, wait a second, I have it here. Okay, I think it's 13. Oh no, that's my wisdom. Okay, let's see. Oh, it's a 14, so let's see what that 14 is. What's the mod for a 14? Oh, that's +2 in this game. Okay, so it's a +2. Okay, so I don't remember my D20 roll at a +2. Okay, so I got a 12. Is that high enough? That slows down the momentum as opposed to in both of these scenarios, if the GM just goes, okay, that's a level 3 fireball, so it's 30 feet in diameter because it's 10 feet diameter per level, and it's 3d6 because it's it's a d6 per level. Boom! No need to look it up, just boom! And likewise, you're going across that rope bridge, get slammed into it by a griffin, makes your dex check. I roll it, I have a +2 to my dex, so it's a 10 + 2, that's a 12. Okay. So, how do we accomplish Rules Lite. Now, there's a whole bunch of Rules Lite games out there, a whole bunch of options. I'm not going to go through all of that. That would take too long. But let me tell you some of the subsystems within a role-playing game that I think ought to be highlighted for Rules Lite. So, the first of these is logistics. Now, I think logistics has been kind of rolled back to a large extent, so I've heard that I don't play that much 5e, but I've heard a lot of people tell me that 5e tends to handwave a lot of logistics around how much food you need or how much lighting, things like that. I'm currently playing old school, like I'm running a Beckby campaign right now. And in old school D&D and a lot of the OSRs today, we have a lot of emphasis on logistical rules, such as lighting, movement rate, encumbrance, timekeeping. Those things are important for dungeon crawls and wilderness hex crawls. And so to me, logistics is an important part, at least in the early phases, of being a hero. You have to make sure if you're going to go into deep, dark dungeons, you need a light source. If you're going to go on expeditions, Indiana Jones style, into the jungle looking for a lost temple or something, you need rations. And they had a lot of rules for those in the old days. And that's really a big part of old school. But the rules were very fiddly. So it was like you had to add up all the different weight of all of the items you're carrying. There were all these rules for, torches versus lanterns, how long they lasted, how much light you got from them and everything. And I'm interested in Rules Lite subsystems that streamline logistics. So there's a concept you can carry 10 or 20 or something, some number of item slots that... most items are one item slot. Armor might be more than one. Small items might be less than one. But the point is, you can only carry so much. Now, that does two things. One is it makes encumbrance a lot easier. I can only carry so many item slots before I'm encumbered. And let's say encumbered means half movement. Another thing that does is it means it's easier for me to remember what's on my character sheet as a player. So if I'm playing, like AD&D First Edition, and I'm 5th level, I might have 100 items on my list. But if I can only carry so many items before I'm out of item slots, or else suffer a half move, that's a thing that I need to keep track of. If I want to crowbar in my inventory, I might have to set down the 10-foot pole. Another thing to streamline is magic system. Now, there are a number of approaches to this. I think a lot of us feel that having to look things up in the manual is too much. One thing I see a lot of are just kind of these simple lists. So like in Knave, for example, there's 100 spells, but they're all just very simple descriptions, and it's up to the GM to interpret them. So it's just like you have elastic limbs, like Plastic Man. Okay, and they last for, I think, usually a certain predetermined set of turns or rounds or something like that are in the description of the game that all spells follow. I'm currently working on my second game ever. In this new one, though, I'm not having spells per se, I'm having spell categories. And this is based off of something that I previously did called Ivan's Simple Magic System. And it's on DriveThruRPG. I'll put a link to that as well. And that's basically the concept that instead of having a long spell list, you have certain categories of magic that you know how to use. So if you know fire magic and you cast a fireball, the diameter is like 10 feet per level of caster, and the damage is d6 per level, something like that. So that there's like a standard amount of time that each thing lasts for. There might be like small, medium, and long spell lengths that are either, your level in rounds, your level in turns, or your level in hours. But it's just a very simple system, so I can kind of go, okay, it's a fireball, so that's how much it does. Or it's invisibility. Invisibility is a long-term spell, so you're level 5, so it's 5 hours. Boom. Done. So there's a lot of different approaches to it, but I think that having something to where you don't have to look up spells is a good thing. Ability scores. I alluded to this earlier, where 6 ability scores is quite a lot to keep track of in your mind. Now, yes, we have it on our character sheets, but again, looking something up in your character sheet slows things down. I have a couple of suggestions. One is I've noticed that we're going in the direction of mods. A lot of OSRs these days, I've noticed, are just mods, not the 3 to 18 score. Now, I'm kind of nostalgic for when each and every score in the 3 to 18 range mattered. There's a couple of solutions to this. One is go to mods, because if you just go to mods and it's -4 to +4, something like that, then it's a lot I think it's easier to remember if it's like a +2 dex versus a 14 dex. My experience has been that it's easier to remember mods. But I have another suggestion, which is something I'm working on in this latest game that I'm making, which I don't think I've seen done before, which is that if you're going to indeed have 6 ability scores, OSR or D&D style, you only have 3 scores or less that are significant and the rest are 0 mod. So maybe you have like a +3, a +1, a -1, and the rest are zeros, right? It could be less scores that are non-zero. But the point is that it's easy to remember. If I have a +3 strength, a +1 dex, and a -1 wisdom, do you remember what my ability scores are? Right, +3 strength, +1 dex, -1 wisdom. If the GM calls for a dex check, boom, +1. I got it. They call for an int check. Which one is it? Not one of those. It must be 0. I think Rules Lite is really good for other procedures. Like one thing I've encountered in Beckme, I'm using the Rules Cyclopedia, and one thing that's kind of funky is when a monster runs away, they have this really fiddly chart that is a percentage roll, and it has to do with how many members are in the pursuing party versus how many members are in the pursued party, and you look both of these things up, cross-reference them, it comes up with some sort of percentage, you roll that percentage, if they make their percentage, they escape, if not, they don't. There are so many things I dislike about that, even though I love Beckme and I love old school. It's something I have to start and look up, is the main reason why I don't like it. But in addition, there isn't really much that the players can actually do to give their character any sort of advantage in making that work. Okay? What I would like instead would be some sort of very simple system like, okay, if they have a higher movement rate than the fastest person in the party, they automatically escape. And then if their movement rate is slower than the fastest person in the party, then whoever has a faster movement rate than them can automatically catch up with them and attack them with missile weapons, maybe. So that way, if you plan ahead, there's consequences for encumbrance. So that way, if you plan ahead and you want to have a light party that can move quickly, you're going to be able to chase monsters down. But you also might have a worse armor class because you didn't wear that plate mail. Again, there are limits to how Rules Lite, I think, things ought to be. We want a little bit of complexity. Players want enough complexity that they have interesting options, like for combat, so they want to be able to do combat maneuvers, things like that. The other thing is that I think in character generation and character advancement, people want enough options so that they can make interesting characters. They can kind of jigger things around a bit in character creation and character advancement so that their characters are just really cool and they really like them and they're, specialized in this particular ways and so forth. And something that's kind of like so simplistic that it just doesn't really let you make anything terribly interesting. It can be kind of a boring game. So that's why I think that Rules Lite is an optimization function. And the rules of thumb that I think are involved in that optimization are what I've said. The GM should be able to have most of the rules memorized most of the time. The players should have most of their character sheet memorized most of the time. If you need to look things up occasionally, I think that's okay and may even be a good consequence of crunch. Or in other words, that having that little crunch in your cookie may be exactly what is also unfortunately going to tip things over to not having things memorized all the time. But if you had something that was so simple that you could memorize things all the time, you wouldn't have a game that was fun, I don't think. Alright, so I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'd love to hear what you think about Rules Lite games, particularly if you're into Rules Lite. Anyway, I look forward to some fruitful discussions, and until next time.